Dear viewers across the world, most welcome to my channel NAGA World Conflict Zone. Israel and Palestine. This is the most conflict zone in the world. International recognition of Palestine would not be mere symbolism. Since the collapse of John Kerry's peace initiative in 2014, the peace process between the Israelis and Palestinians has entered a prolonged hibernation. Both the Israeli and Palestinian political systems are preoccupied with internal discord, and the international community has either lost interest or the belief that it can make any difference in terms of ending this intractable conflict. Periodically, the idea of the formal recognition of a Palestine state by other states or international bodies such as United Nations or the European Union is floated as a game changer that will break the impasse. So far, it has been more of a trickle than a flood of countries and institutions recognizing Palestine as a state. Most notably, the decision by United Nations General Assembly to upgrade it to non-member observation state status and by UNESCO to admit it as a full member. However, the much coveted recognition as a state by the United Nations Security Council has remained elusive, mainly due to the veto power of US. US is the main obstacle in the two-state solution in Middle East between Israel and Palestine. This means Palestine remains a hybrid political entity that many countries consider a state but will not go so far as doing the honorable things and recognizing it as a state regardless of the Security Council. This means it does not get treated as an equal member of the community of sovereign states. In an insightful column in the pages of this newspaper, Ramji Baraud last month highlighted the double standard of politicians who tend the supportful recognition of Palestine while they are in opposition, but avoid the issue altogether when they win elections. And assume power, leaving their pre-elections promises to ring hollow. Hence, Baraud rightly stressed that the recent decision by the opposition's Australian Labour Party (ALP) to recognize Palestine is merely an example of symbolic politics, which at best raises hopes of the policy being translated into something more substantial whenever the ALP returns to power. The power of symbolism cannot and should not be underestimated, but there is also overwhelming evidence that international recognitions of Palestine's the causes of peace, justice, and international law. For too long, the issues of recognition has been framed as a prize waiting for Palestine at the end of negotiation. This has always put Palestine negotiator in an interior positions around the negotiations table vice Israel, which is not only a superior military and economic force that is occupying its land, but one that is formally a state. Laying to a rest to the question and the whip of the Palestine self-determinations would accelerate the peace negotiation and give them a better chance of succeeding. As long as those in a positions of power in Israel still toy with the idea that postponing or procrastinating over Palestine statehood can delay or even kill off the possibility of Palestine sovereignty. It remains an incentive for them to never enter into genuine peace negotiation, let alone conclude them with an agreement. After all, the already existing asymmetry between Israel and the Palestinians was enshrined in the Oslo Accord, where the Palestine Liberation Organization PLO reaffirmed its recognition of Israel's right to exist, and in turn Israel recognized the PLO as the sole representative of the Palestinian people but not Palestinian right to self-determinations. Recognizing a people's right to self-determination is not some kind of prize that one country bestows on another out of generosity, but is a founding principle of the United Nations Charter as an important pillar of developing friendly relations among nations and for peace to prevail. The United Nations might not be able to enforce an end to Israel's occupations of the West Bank and its blockade of Gaza, but it can and should do the decent things in line with its own articles of faith and recognize Palestine. Moreover, it was United Nations Resolution 181 that determined the independent Arab and Jewish states shall come into existence in Palestine 2 months after the evacuation of the armed force of the mandatory power has been completed, but in any case, not later than 1 October 1948. Surely more than 70 years after this resolution was passed by a large majority. It is a complete anomaly that only half of it has been fulfilled, regardless of the origin of this failure. United Nations Security Council's recognitions will do no more than reaffirm what was supported by a majority of the member states back in 1947. Furthermore, the international community, especially the US and European Union, has invested immense political capital in, not to mention vast amount of financial and security aid and support in many areas of state building for the Palestinians. The failure to bring this huge effort to its just and logical conclusion should weigh heavy on the shoulders of the international community. Its current reluctance to become involved with the Palestine-Israel conflict and especially to resolving it should not be compounded by a chance of halt over the importance of the Palestinians' right to justice and self-determination. The international community's Apathy is more a case of despair and mistaken belief that it is powerless to change the situations. Recognitions of the Palestinians as a state would be a relatively easy move for the European Union, for instance, and not that costly, especially with a more sympathetic US administrations for the next few years, even if Washington's considering its own domestic constraint is not capable of following suit. However, it would create a new dynamic within the international community, even if issues such as final border, Jerusalem, and a fair and just solution for the refugees remain unresolved for the time being. These issues would, in any case, be easier to negotiate after Palestine statehood is normalized. Lastly, Tel Aviv has tried for years to frame the so-called unilateral recognitions of Palestine as an anti-Israel act. This is complete and utter nonsense and should be seen by the international community as no more than another PR exercise in guilt tripping those who support dozens of United Nations resolutions to this effect that reflect an international consensus recognizing Palestine reaffirm the undeniable and inalienable right of a nation in the very same way that led the Zionist movement to establish the state of Israel. To, to compromise, to recognize Palestine is to oppose the occupations, not to compromise the right of Israel to exist in peace and security. The onus now is on the conscience and wisdom of the international community. It is recognized by E.S.C. McBells is Professor of International Relations and an Associate Fellow of the MENA program at Chatham House.